Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Oraculos True Divination podcast, where I bring you ancient wisdom for the modern mystic. I'm your host, Mychal A. Bryan, and joining me today is Mr. Brett Joseph. Brett, thank you so much for being here.
My honor. How in the heavens are you in these turbulent times, Mychal?
All is well. What about you?
Yeah, I mean it's wild, right? So we're recording this really during a lunar eclipse in Sagittarius, and there's a lot happening. I mean, riots on the street. This is a time of great change. We've been calling for it. There will be some labor pains. It's interesting to watch that without and within, to participate that in both realms. It's a lot. This kind of COVID lockdown, and
Yeah.
all of the things. So it's tremendously strange and challenging, and also very beautiful. I'm afraid and I'm excited.
All of the things.
Yeah.
All of the things. Now, you and I have quite a bit to dive into today, but before that, for those of you out there watching, if this is your first time tuning in to the True Divination podcast, the True Divination podcast is where I bring you interviews with astrologers from around the world and how they're using astrology not just to change their lives, but also to change their worlds. So if that is something that you are interested in continuing to be a part of, please do take a moment, go down below, hit the like and subscribe button. And apparently there's a bell someplace that you're supposed to hit as well in order for you to get the notifications. So if you find that bell, please make sure that you hit it as well so that you stay up to date with the amazing interviews that I'm bringing you from these amazing astrologers from around the world. Now, Brett, or is it Gemini Brett? Because from I was first introduced to you and your work, it was always within the context of you being Gemini Brett. And I think that you recently moved back to being just Brett Joseph on Facebook, right?
Well, Facebook moved me back. And it was a fascinating thing, Mychal. It's something I chose not to resist at all, because the symbol was so clear. I was literally visiting my father, and was standing maybe 40 feet from where my grandfather had died, like weeks before, when Facebook told me I had to take their name back, right? Which is Joseph, my last name, my patrilineal name, if you will. So, yeah, I mean, I still work as Gemini Brett. Like if you see me talking at a conference or teaching for one of the organizations or whatever. But, I saw that as an important thing. I mean, and some of that, I guess, was symbolically, or more than that, like coming out of the closet. I think I didn't build my moniker only to hide behind it, but I did have some intention of maybe preserving the opportunity to teach in an academic setting in such a way that I wouldn't have been, tainted by being a professional astrologer. And I'm over that now, but it's a sad thing in our day and age that the sacred sciences have been so shunned from the academic setting. And of course, those of us like yourself who are doing work to take back, the science, to keep the sacred scientific, I like to say, so that we can keep the scientific sacred. I think we're making really important moves right now in astrology to reclaim a foothold in that places of academic appreciation, because this is, as you know, the oldest science there is.
I think it's so important, this piece of reclaiming a place of dignity for astrology amongst academia, because I also had a similar coming out of the closet experience in terms of myself being a practicing astrologer, but also wanting to move within academic circles and not being judged by it. So I think that for those of us who have feet in both of these, oftentimes seemingly very different parts of life, one being astrology and one being pure academics, it creates an internal sense of conflict, because both of these things matter a lot to us, but it's a matter of being able to exist in the world and have the world see that, hey, I can be an astrologer and still have a valid, intelligent opinion about life. So it's really interesting that you also went through that same experience.
Yeah, and there have been some pretty intelligent astrologers. Galileo comes to mind, right? And
Precisely.
so I'm really interested in that. It's kind of fringe still, but like in academic circles, archaeoastronomy has become a thing, right? Like finally giving credit to the ancient stone circle, pyramid, etc. builders, the ancient temples with their star alignments, with their alignments to solstices, equinox, lunar standstill cycles. This, I mean, it was very, vehemently denied by the academic circles until very recently that these ancient sky watchers could know more about the sky than those of us who only look on, computer screens because the urban lights have taken the experience of the sky from most of our eyes, right? So,
Yeah.
which just seems ridiculous, but of course we're married to this idea that society's evolving and we're getting smarter and smarter, and that the iPhone is the greatest technology, right, ever. So I love that in academic circles like archaeoastronomy, looking at, in a sense, the astronomical architecture of the ancients has become a thread. And it's something that I've followed personally, passionately, like around the world. I've been, I can say, initiated by many of these ancient temples just by their star alignments. And that's a field I could see myself like working in and teaching and developing, that I guess we could say is not astrological, but I would argue it's actually the most astrological thing there is. And I'm very optimistic about the truth that that is now becoming an accepted field within the realms of academia, because I think that as soon as you start honoring the truth that the ancients were aligning temples to the stars for some reason or another, as you start to learn that way and you get aligned, and as you get aligned, you open up to the messages that the sky and the earth and their marriage speak, And also the other thing about that, like I've been doing a lot of research over the last few years on the star alignments of some of the cities like London and Paris and Washington, D.C., which of course was not constructed long ago, and they're continuously adding to this program, whoever they are, of like really interesting star alignments. The DC map is one of my great fascinations at this time.
Uh, Now, Brett, we've kind of dived right into the heart of where we're going today. But before we get there, tell us a little bit, or even a lot a bit, about who it is you are, what your relationship to astrology has been, and how exactly you came to having the current view and perspective of astrology that you do today.
Sure. I'm pretty new to astrology. It was 2012 for me, and late in 2012. For some years before, had started to kind of crack open, and as it is for many of us, through a kind of dark night of the soul, because I acted in ways that I despised. And coming into consciousness of that and seeing that and taking a look at myself, and needing healing and coming to many different traditions, like the tarot, to start learning a bit. And then it was synchronicity, oddly, which through a fortune cookie led me to some shamanic training in my life, and mostly rooted in the traditions of Peru. And that just started really opening things. I mean, I thought that I was a very open-minded person. I left school, though I was a really good kind of academic student, to pursue music. I'm a saxophone player, and I chased my horn around the world for many years in a really fun band. And that was in like 99, well, no, like 96 to 2000-ish. When that ended, I was really anchored into this question of, what am I as talented at as these guys are with music? Because I was playing in a band with just great musicians. I mean, they've all blown up. They're all doing amazing gigs now. And I'm a good musician. I'm not a great musician. And I knew it. And so the bigger we got, the smaller I got, because I was really just crushed with this like confidence issues. And I tried to excel at the other realms of, rock and roll. That wasn't really happening through the saxophone. So,
Yeah.
but that question led me back to college because all I had known at that point is that I had great talents as like a mathematician. My mother had always told me I should be an engineer, and so I decided to go back to engineering school, and it took me a while to get back on track academically, and I ended up graduating with an engineering degree from the University of Washington in
Wow.
2005. I had been in Seattle for some time. But there was a really important moment for me. It was like a subtle, it was one of those, huge subtle things. I was waiting for a bus on campus at UW, and I was already starting to burn out on the idea of applied mathematics. Like I love mathematics. It opens these worlds, like once you get into these advanced things, they're very spiritual, truthfully. I wouldn't have used that word for it at that time, but the applied mathematics, it was just like bridge building and whatever. Anyway, so I'm waiting for this bus, and true to Seattle nature, it's kind of like foggy out, and I was looking at this street light in the fog and the haze, and I saw like very clearly in the sky surrounding that lamp these arrows that we would draw in engineering all the time, like the force, the
Yeah.
Newtonian free body diagram it's called, right? So I literally like saw that, and I woke up immediately to, oh my gosh, I'm literally constricting my consciousness to this type of world, this like mechanistic worldview, and I'm going to be trapped in it. And so in that moment, it was just no. I had had a moment like that some years before and chose to pursue music over like the kind of academic career. So it happened again. I think that saved me, as did just the world of the economic world at that time, from like buying into a square job where I would have got completely stuck. Like I did, this was the time of my Saturn return, and I did end up getting like a so-called real job, and I was in the, real relationship and all that
Yeah.
stuff. But that fortunately kind of shattered. And as I was trying to pick up the pieces and starting to honor these symbols, like one thing that came in for me was a few friends who I very much trusted from a circle of, collective healing, who advised that I receive a shamanic astrology reading from Daniel Gemario, who is the founder of the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School. And I was like, all right, this is where I was saying earlier, I felt I was open-minded. I mean, but I definitely, though I wasn't in complete like denial, I think I believed what I was taught about astrology in school growing up, And it's actually very important for me now because I have a really hard time taking the word of any teacher or any teaching or any book at face value. Like I'm going to go pursue and try to get to the roots of these rules I'm being told to use, even by, astrologers today. I want to go look at, is this thing real? Because I was lied to by my teachers. It wasn't them trying to lie to me, right? But they were supporting a system of lies, right? I mean, that is
Mm-hmm.
the academic system. So, and I think I'll say there's purpose for that.
Right.
Anyway, so I listened, and I was on a waiting list for Daniel, and I ordered his book, and I read it like a couple times before we connected, and it was cool. It was the first time I found out I'm not just a Scorpio, right? Because that's where my sun sign lives, and
Yeah.
this thing about the Gemini moon, and this thing about Gemini rising, and Virgo Venus, and Cancer Mars, and Leo Saturn. And oh wow, that Scorpio sun squares that Leo Saturn. What does that mean? My sun's with Uranus, and all these things were opening up, right? And of course, I had a lot more questions than answers, but I was starting to actually get kind of developed in his paradigms language even before we connected. And so, I told him a bunch of what I had learned about my chart from his book when we first connected. He said, "Hey, that's really good. Like, you should consider studying with me." And then he told me a bunch of things that nobody should possibly know about. I mean, we all know
Yeah.
how that is anyway,
Yeah.
listening to the astrology podcast. And so that changed my life. This was 2012. I was like really fired up about the end of the 13, or the beginning of the 13 Baktun long count Maya cycle at that point. And I was taking it seriously. I didn't know what it would be, but I decided to spend my time first in the jungles of Peru doing some shamanic training and healing, most importantly. And then on that date, December 21st, 2012, I was at Machu Picchu.
Uh,
And, I think that while certainly the world did not end or whatever, mine did. And it
Yeah.
was very intentional. You know, it was the first time I missed Christmas with my family. You know, I was like out on a journey by myself. I was like wanting to tune into a life that waited for me, just behind the doors of that one that kept me from being who I truly was. And so I thought that maybe it was training and kind of the jungle work, and that's not what it was, because even when I was there, actually in December 14th, 2012, Jupiter, I didn't know at the time because I didn't really know about transits yet, but he was right at my Gemini ascendant. And in the jungles of Peru late one night, we had a conversation. And it started with, sit down, boy. And then Jupiter spoke to me in English. I don't experience that often, for about 4 hours. And then it ended with, like, now go spread the word. And I had to, at that time, decide either I'm just having a psychotic break or I'm having a conversation with the planet. And I decided like the latter would be more interesting and less painful. And so I listened, and it was really helpful that the next day with another brother who was at the center in the jungle in Peru, like I was able to, I think, eloquently and intellectually and articulately transmit much of what I had learned the night before, which was basically a summary and a realignment from Jupiter or whatever that force is of many of the branches I had been pursuing. The Gemini mantra I have is these many branches I'm called to climb all emanate from the same trunk. Yeah. And I saw how this thread of astrology was going to be like one language where all of these other pursuits could find their way through. Mm-hmm. And it was really helpful for me to see that next day that I can teach these things. And I could understand through this person's reflections that he was understanding what I was saying. And so when I got back to the States after that, the world didn't end. I did choose to end my old world. I kind of shifted shortly after that time to like part-time square job, because in February of 2013, I went to Arizona and studied transits actually with Daniel Jamario at the Astronomy Astrology Mystery School. And then when I got back, I decided that I should do some trades, you know, and I sat with healers like you and received some like body work for an astrology thing or whatever. But that really quickly led to those people sending friends, like paying people to my house. Mm-hmm. And I had to sit at that time with, oh, I'm not ready. But I had to also honor the signs. And I realized that it wasn't just astrology that folks were coming to me for. My business at that point was actually called More Than Astrology. And I would literally have a book by my side, you know. Yeah. But and this trade thing I think is really important, and it's beautiful, especially for the awakening of the new world. I think it's important for the so-called student of astrology, if they're doing readings, but just not calling them that because they don't feel they're ready. I think it's important to receive some kind of exchange, because you are receiving some kind of exchange, and that's a long topic maybe for another time. But anyway, like that started coming quickly, and I realized like not only is this like a viable vocation, which was enlightening, but also that this is it. Like this is me having the opportunity to help people help themselves. I was realizing over time, like the first time that happened for me, I was a math tutor at a community college, and breaking people out of the prison of I will never be able to add negative numbers, and seeing them shatter in ancient tears, like pour forth, like that feeling told me more about what I'm here to be than anything else. Right. Yeah. And so I went to my first NORWAC astrology conference in Seattle in 2013, and was so excited to see and hear people speaking this language in the halls. I wasn't the only one. And I realized I had no idea what most of these people were talking about. And so, of course, the journey into this infinite language that we could never truly master, like really began. And I started, as the Gemini ascendant hopefully is wont to do, or all of us should, like started looking here and there and here and there, and like, you know, just starting to assemble these things. I'm a jazz musician as well. We like, you know, I like to play like this cat, I like to play like this cat, and trying to refine our own voice. And that's what's been happening since. And so much of that has been true to Daniel's like own passions for ancient sites, star alignments, which has been alive for me before astrology, and for the importance of reclaiming that experiential sky practice and reconnecting that to astrology. I like to say when we renature our craft, we will remember the roots of the rules and the proofs of the equations we use, right? True to that devotion, I never really studied the sky so much with Daniel, but I certainly sat in the field of that passion, and it resonates so much with my own. And so one of the things I think I'm most known for in the astrological community is kind of being this sky guy, this astronomy guy. But importantly, like I just taught astronomy for astrologers, a month-long thing for the Organization for Professional Astrology. And, you know, I call this work sacred astronomy because it's not just about, oh, this is the angular measurement of the highest altitude of the celestial equator and the latitude in which you live, da, da, da. It's like tuning us into what we think, you know, was the roots of our craft, which is cats out experiencing the heavenly happening and then relating that to the correspondences of what they see on Earth. And my path, which has been so like tied to that direct astronomical experience, later led me through sister traditions to astronomy, which are harmony, geometry, and number. The sacred science is known as the quadrivium. And so that's where I am as a student and as a teacher now.
Mm-hmm. Brett, I think it's really important, and I also think that it's really heartening to hear about your story with astrology, especially the way in which that tied so deeply into deep waves of healing and self-discovery for you. And I think that in the 21st century, a lot of us either find our way into astrology by way of it serving as a healing bridge to take us from someplace in our lives where we don't want to be into a deeper, more embodied sense of ourselves, or it comes up as a result of us having gone through healing of some kind. And so I really think that it's important, this piece about you going essentially on the journey of the dark night of the soul into the jungle to really meet the sky, but in so doing, also meet yourself. And this piece that you bring to astrology about living in a relationship with the living sky, I think it's a really important one, because I've followed you for a few years and I've seen not only the photography that you've posted, but I've also seen some of the videos that you posted. And I always admire people who have the ability to take us back to a living, felt, embodied reality of astrology that's based on the sky. Because at the end of the day, if we don't have a working natural philosophy, which is in a sense what every classical astrologer had, they didn't just have the chart that they were scribbling with some charcoal on a slate. They had the actual external working philosophy of being in nature and being impacted by nature based on their observation of nature. And I think that that's something really important that you bring to the table, because in terms of the work that you do, it essentially demands of us to realize that our astrology goes much further than the software that we're using on our laptop or on our cell phone, but it should, in a sense, take us back to the temple of the infinite sky around us. So, I mean, amazing work that you've done with that. And I think that everyone in the astrological community benefits from taking part in this dialogue regarding sacred astronomy.
I just couldn't have said it more beautifully myself, Mychal. Thank you for that reflection. Thank you for receiving that. I mean, yeah, and of course, the software is amazing too, right? I mean, we learn so much from this technology. I mean, not only for me, like the astrology software, but also like astronomy software. When I lived in Seattle, I lived there for 17 years, and that's where I got hooked on the sky. And it was tricky. I remember I had a conversation with Rick Levine one time, just at a party, and somebody was like, "Hey, this is an astrologer you should meet, Brett." I didn't know who Rick was at the time, which tells you how green I was in astrology then, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, "Hey, Rick, man, do you know a good field for stargazing around here?" And he said, "Yeah, there's this great place down south. It's called Arizona." And fortunately, I took Rick's advice, and I traveled a lot from Seattle. It's good for the depression that comes with the long cloud that eats the sky for long periods of time. But I would travel to Hawaii regularly and to Arizona regularly and gather people and find a way to pay for the trip, and just really started getting connected. And I mean, like you mentioned, photographs, for me, that was in many ways inspired by a guest I know that you've had recently, who's Gary Caton, who's another sky guy. He's a great friend of mine, a great mentor. I've studied some traditional astrology with Gary and alchemy with Gary, and also he and I have spent like long nights out in Sedona and other places, like, you know, just drinking stars and taking pictures of them. And it really is, it's interesting with the camera, because on one level, I feel like it really takes me out of the moment of my experience of the sky, because I'm like pushing buttons and making settings and thinking, will people like this? And, you know, but on another level, it's like tuning me into a different part of it. And it's such a cool thing, because a photo of the sky, it's like half of a chart. I mean, it's not, because we can't even see, you know, the
Right.
6 houses in a frame of the camera. But that idea of like this ever moving, infinite dance of the celestial choreography, and just snapping a moment of it, and knowing as an astrologer, as we do, like how unique and how important every moment is, right? And being in that moment. And then astrology for me is also so exciting, because the more I learn, and like the astronomical helps, right? Like the more I learn to, without the software, to rewind the chart, to see what degree held the previous new moon or the coming full moon, just looking at a nativity, to see like, oh, Jupiter's about to station retrograde, or that's a really fast Saturn, or whatever. Like seeing that in a chart, it just opens an experience of time that I've never had before. And I think it's really important as astrology. One of my mantras is astrology is a way in, not astrology is a way out. Like I do it, but I really try to resist the idea of blaming parts of my own personal psychosis or arrogance or whatever on like natal aspects, you know, or current transits or whatever it may be. That's astrology is a way out, right? Astrology is a way in. It's a vehicle to ask these great questions, those questions that can only be answered with better questions, which is, who am I? What the F is this place? How did we get here? What are we doing here? How the heck do we get out of here? Or how in the heavens do we stay? Should we want to? All of those things, you know? And so in astrology, there's this thing that happens often, right? Which is people will teach like, oh, these glyphs of the planets that we use today, they're all composed of these 3 elements alone, the circle of spirit and the crescent of soul and the cross of matter. And then they turn the page. It's like, wait, what? Like, yo, that's what I'm in this thing for.
Yeah.
Like, I'm in this thing to know me, to help others know themselves. I'm in this thing to feel, to heal, to know, to grow. But I am most interested in what is spirit, what is a soul, what is matter even, which is a very interesting question, more interesting than we would initially think, right? And those questions, like that vehicle, and the beautiful truth of astrology, you know, for me, astrology is so much more than a symbolic language alone. It is the poetic breath of nature. But it is also a language of symbol, and beautifully we write it hieroglyphically. We write astrology in these charts, or the software does for us, right? With these glyphs. And these glyphs, they have teachings. And so it was interesting to me that I realized that I wasn't going to find those answers like on a chart or in the sky, but I had to stop watching all those so-called sacred geometry videos I had been seeing on YouTube and actually put a compass in my hand. And that is an amazing personal initiation. Like just sweeping a circle with a compass changed my life in ways I cannot describe. Like it is an ancient initiation path into a, I'll say a technology that is impossible to describe with words. And I could see like going there why, when later I got hip to this idea that the quadrivium were these 4 studies of number, astronomy, number in time and space, has it's at, you know, at the top of branches of number in time, which is harmony, musical harmony, frequency, you know, and number in space, geometry. And we know, especially when we study traditional astrology, as you and I have, like how important the geometry was. how important this image of like harmonic, and it shows in aspects in our charts, right? And that's all rooted in number itself. And for me to have then gone into a quest, which I'm very, young in, of like realigning my association to numbers, like realizing that there's a significant difference between one and oneness.
Mm-hmm.
He says there is a difference between, the astronomical measurement of Jupiter and Saturn conjoined by celestial longitude on December 21st, 2020, and how that quantifiable, measurable thing in a kind of unquantifiable and kind of immeasurable way is going to dance you differently than it dances me, right? And we have this amazing sacred science of astrology to help bridge that gap between the astronomy and the correspondences, between the measurable and the immeasurable. And there's something, as we know, that is just so sacred about that. And while it defies words, I'm going to do my best to try, I think, for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I'm really pleased to hear other astrologers talking about the quadrivium and the necessary place that fit within classical systems of learning, because it brings us back to nature, essentially, this arithmetic, this music, this geometry, this astronomy. It brings us back to harmonies inherent within nature. And when we begin to operate and understand ourselves from this perspective of harmonies, and from this perspective of the music of the spheres, and from this perspective of harmonics, it changes the way how we see astrology, and it changes the astrology that we see. And this point that you're making about the difference between one and oneness, it's a really sublime point for me, because I study harmonics in astrology as well. And when you study harmonics, you understand that every number has an inbuilt property that isn't just the fact that one comes before two and two comes before three and it's after one. It's that this number within itself is a vehicle of potency, because there is something very distinctly different about two-ness than there is about oneness. And then if we can take that awareness and transplant that onto our astrology, it gives us something else to sink our teeth into in terms of our astrology, as opposed to, I'm a Taurus, so I lazy and I like to eat food in bed. It it adds a working philosophy. And I think that as I listen to you, what I hear you calling for from within the hearts of us as astrologers is a working understanding of harmonic philosophy, and how that allows us to fit within the greater structure of this cosmos within which we live and breathe and have our being.
Yeah, I mean, the harmonic pursuit, right? Like, I'm very interested in David Cochran's work and the vibrational astrology, which of course is born of that harmonic field. It's so beautiful. It's interesting to me. Like, I mean, kind of true to this Gemini moniker. On one level, I'm like whole sign, traditional aspects to the point of it's not a circle, it's a dodecagon. You know what I mean? And Gemini cannot see Taurus and cannot see Cancer.
Yeah.
That is the gig, and you want to start talking about it.
Yeah.
And Tisha, like, okay, let's play, but
Uh-huh.
there are 12 houses on this block, and some windows can see other houses and some cannot, right? So on one level, like that, and that beautiful truth of like, and this is a really amazing teaching of the compass, like the creation creates in 12s.
Yes.
And see, I can find that now in the number magic, which is how I usually these days like to give this term arithmetic, right? So maybe for folks who haven't like had a formal introduction to the quadrivium, because Mychal and I are speaking deep into our path into that journey. These are known as like the four kind of sciences of the seven liberal arts. So like in the mystery traditions, it said you would first learn the trivium, which are logic and grammar and rhetoric. And in a sense, that prepares you for your learning. And then you'll move towards this gateway of astronomy. Now, so when we say that word today, right, and this is why I like to say sacred astronomy, because when we say astronomy today, we think of these guys with these huge, telescopes that they drop on sacred mountains, and they're extending this long, phallus to narrow their one-eyed view into this experience of long ago and far away, and trip
Yeah.
into the like Big Bang,
Yeah.
theories. And it's cool. Like, we have a serious debt to, the rational scientists, even side of the astronomers today. Like, what would we do without the ephemerides? Now, my goal is to get to the point where I can like see the chart in the sky well enough, especially if I have some time to look, where even if an ion blast took our technology away, I would be able to be a living ephemerides, not in the style of our friend Nick Dagan Best, who just knows where the planet's going to be any day because somehow the ephemerides is like part of him. But and Nick does this too, in knowing the cycles, and also just being able to look at the moon like I did last night. I was looking at the moon, it was with Antares. And as I did, I was like, oh, wow, so that's a Sagittarius moon. An owl flew right through the disk of the moon. It was like the most powerful experience. And I was like, huh, and went to bed. It's like, so that kind of experience. And what does that, like, why did that happen? So that's another thread, but let me get back to the quadrivium. So what we call astrology today is what the tradition would actually call correspondences. Right. So astrology is actually two things. It is the quantity of the heavenly happenings, and that's astronomy, like what you can put your ruler to. And we need to know that, right? Like, so for us to take these ephemerides and use them to feel and heal and know and grow, great. But let's also honor that it's coming from there. And I think very importantly, like, part of my purpose in this idea of, or this devotion of helping awaken astrologers to the astronomy of astrology. Like, I don't start with the Big Bang. That has no place for me. And like, it's not necessary in like knowing that the chart is a model of the sky, right? Like, it's a cool thing. People should dig what our cosmologies are or whatever, but that's not in the chart,
Yeah.
The chart is, this is the midheaven and whatever. And if you go outside and you start to see that, then it just links the mind and the body mind and the hearts in between, like that great vehicle of the transmission, right? But the other purpose besides like just embodying and renaturing astrology is to preserve the astronomy that most modern astronomers are choosing to forget. And some of that choice is actually based in their programmed need to hate astrology. So when you start erasing Libra and Scorpio and Sagittarius and Capricorn from the old maps, so it won't be like, ridiculed in this ancient archaic idiocy, you lose so much of what we knew, just as the church like didn't know how long a year was, and until Easter slipped too far from the equinox and they had to freak out about it. That's when they went to dust off the old transmissions from our scientists, who had sorted that out so long ago, and not only like written it down in text, fortunately, but also chiseled it into stone around the world, right? So there's something very beautiful in that, being with the truth that the sun does not set into the same place in your horizon every day, and watching that movement of the sun back and forth, and seeing, by the way, that that's the Cancer glyph, the sun moving 6 months one way and stopping to turn around at solstice, at the tropicos, the turnarounds, and going 6 months the other way. And crabs walk sideways like that, at the surf, which walks sideways like that. And we start seeing, as you were saying, that you start developing this experience of nature, which is really at the roots of our craft. But the more we are removed from it, the more that we are just kind of parroting rules or like utilizing equations that work. And that's what I would say most important. But if, just as this is true in mathematics as well, if you can get to that proof of the equation, your intimate connection to it is going to allow you to be like a mathematician, not a computer, right? And so this is happening. And there's a beautiful awakening, from a modern perspective. Maybe I'd say there's something about Uranus and Taurus that kind of heaven and earth connection that will support this movement. But part of it is actually, speaking of Uranus, it is a revolutionary movement for me, because if I let the rationalist mind destroy our knowledge, how is that any worse than what the church did when it burned this thing at the stake? So I'm going to go for a little bit more of a flow here, and I promise I'll get back to this trunk of this tree. But there's something that we both have touched on. I think that's really importantly said or honored or invoked, which is like, I mean, like, what if in school we weren't taught two until we contemplated oneness? And then if you did, you would understand that there can't be a thing like 1 + 1 = 2, because you can't add oneness to oneness. As Hermes says, all things have been and they arose from one through the mediation of one. So all things have their birth in this one thing by adaptation. You can adapt oneness, you can translate oneness, you can reflect oneness, you can reflect upon your oneness. And this is how a soul is born from spirit. And that's a long story. But oneness is oneness. The all is the all. And still, should children learn that? There's something about, and I think this is a very beautiful Saturnian expression. There's fun astro map things happening as I connect with you in the Bahamas that really invoke the nature of Saturn, and interestingly Neptune right now. So I think people are hearing that in us. But you know, there's an importance to that constriction, right? You will rarely find a mystic who didn't have an estranged experience with at least one of their parents. You know, there's something about you're not allowed to that serves as a capacitor for you to store this energy so that when you are ready to, you can shoot this thing further than you could possibly throw it. You know what I mean? And so there's something I think also, I think this beautifully happened, actually is happening for especially Western astrology. We say alchemically solve et coagula, break apart, put together. There's something where we had to literally be burned away from our roots to the point where for thousands of years we forgot there should be an astrological difference between being born at day or being born at night. Like that should be the most obvious thing. If we're having an embodied natural experience of the moving of the heavens, like your primary experience is day and night, right? And yet sect was like lost to the Western craft for so long. It's fascinating to me, right? But in that disconnection from our roots, where did we go? We went into this Jungian, archetypal, dream-like, healing, psychic space. And for some, I think maybe for most, and maybe we could say it's gotten a little too woo and a little too ungrounded. But now as we project hindsight and others, you know, dust off the old texts, and we have this opportunity now, and we know it's challenging at our time. There's people taking sides, but we have this opportunity now to bring the salt and the spirit of the thing back together into the lesser stone, to speak alchemically, you know? And we are living at a very beautiful and important and powerful renaissance of astrology, just as the so-called age of the Renaissance itself was born in the return of the Corpus Hermetica and so much of this astrological wisdom, which blossomed into these arts. And so at that time, like in the Gothic cathedral times, and this root, it's probably back into the mystery traditions. We really can't say for sure. You were encouraged to learn. If you wanted to know astrology, you needed to know astronomy. But astrology was known as the higher of the lower sciences, or the highest of the lower purposes. And so your path there was through number, which they call arithmetic. But look, when we say that word, we say, oh my gosh, that, you know, addition. But that's arithmetic is as much 1 + 1 = 2 as you can never add oneness to oneness. So 2 is the not 2, etc. Right? And then number in space, geometry, again, that word like feels like Euclidean proofs in high school. No. So I just say sacred geometry because that's that's a better term to invoke at least the quality of number in space, and then harmony as well. And in the music metaphor, and it's much more than a metaphor, it's such a powerful transmission. Not only can it tune us into the importance of tuning into harmonics, as you were saying, but also in the whole sign map. Like I have a music map where I take the 12, because creation creates in 12s, half steps of a Western octave, and I marry them to the 12 signs of the zodiac. in this way, I've always experienced this. I hear a chart, but now I'm working with a great and old bandmate, a just genius master pianist, Eric Deutsch, and he and I are working together where I'll do a translation of a chart into musical harmony, and then he'll channel like a 12-minute solo piano piece. And it's so killer, right? Because we give people an opportunity to like experience their astrology, not just in the realms of the intellect, but in their body. And I've seen some just cathartic releases from this happen. If people are interested in that, check out GeminiBrett.com. You'll find a soul of the song thing. Anyway, so long rant there. But yeah, this path, it's an ancient path. And it's an amazing mystical path of initiation. And the last thing I'll say about that, the great thing about quadrivium, and it's teaching me about all things that matter, is the subject is the teacher, or at least the mirror of the one and only teacher who is you. So if you want to learn astronomy, go look. If you want to learn geometry, don't watch a video, about the seed of life or whatever. Put a compass in your hand and study creation through creating.
Brett, this is really creating the framework for a very particular relationship to astrology, and I'm going to go there. But something that I found interesting in what you were saying was how today we have the opportunity to have a renaissance of sorts in terms of our astrology, because we did go gung-ho for Carl Jung during the psychological revolution in astrology, and then in the 90s with all of the work from Project Hindsight, we had such a great revival in classical techniques, and we find that a large faction of the astrological community has chosen to go in that direction. But what I do find to be most important and most stimulating and most exciting is the prospect of a marriage of these two pieces that oftentimes seem to be antithetical to each other. And I think that we, in the 21st century, as astrologers, boldly poised on a platform to do something really spectacular with our astrology, we stand in the space of alchemists of old to make these things that seem to have no relationship to each other operate together and function together in a way that would reflect the internal kinship between these two things. And it takes me back to another alchemical axiom, which is subspecie interioritatis, which says that the heart of a thing, it lies within that thing regardless. It's that which lies in the heart of interiority. So no matter what we've done with astrology, no matter the fact that we've forgotten techniques for thousands of years, there is still something within astrology itself that holds these things within its heart of hearts until such a time as we're in a place where we have the tools to revive these things again. So with all of these classical techniques that we've gotten back, it isn't that we've gotten them back from the past, but we've gotten them from deep within the structure of our astrology itself. And our astrology has the ability to revive itself, I think. I think that's the main piece, that something that's alive, a living philosophy like astrology, it holds all of its secrets within it, no matter what we as humans could do to it. And it just waits again for a moment where it can reveal itself, but it's always there, I think.
Yeah, that's really powerfully and beautifully and poetically said.
Yeah.
And I literally tears in my eyes right now, because there's a very like optimistic, hopeful, and genuinely true, current in that expression, right? Like what you just said really matters, because truth cannot be burned away. Right? The flame comes to purify it, right? So the calcination, it's not easy, right? And I think even more difficult than getting burned down into that, gray matter is now flooding it to like separate, and through the disillusion, going into that place where we have to release our grip on what we think is, so that we can finally see through the tales and the language and the whispers of the symbols what truly is. And we're in this time, you know, we are in this amazing renaissance of astrology. Like, I mean, even, you know, the data will show that it's way more popular, that the, you know, millennials, as they're called, are like, you know, really interested. And I mean, it's an amazing thing. Like, what a gift for our elders who have been after this thing for decades and decades to see that this hard work that they've done to like pursue this genuine pursuit of healing is in that regard, like they have paved a way for something that is happening, right? And we could look at this time like, I mean, how many astrologers didn't say 2020 was going to be a serious roller coaster and an amazing, powerful time? I mean, for years and for some for decades, this time has been looked forward to. And
Mhm.
most are seeing it, of course, through the Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto play, the Capricorn Council happening. Like I see it in the eclipse, like the eclipse that's coming next week, the June solstice eclipse that will have happened, I think, before some people hear this, but I literally feel it's the most powerful astronomical and therefore astrological event of our lifetimes. And I've been looking
Wow.
at it for a long time. But what I mean, what is it for people who have just kind of started on the fringes to tune into astrology? It's like everybody's saying 2020 is a big deal. Like they're probably just doing that to like draw attention to this thing. And then, oh my gosh, like those folks were right, you know? Like for astrology in a sense to prove itself in that way, to many more people because there's more people listening to real astrology, which, you
Right.
know, obviously just the newspaper column thing is typically and less so now, very much less so
Mhm.
now than it would have been, like going to miss out on the so-called big events, you know.
Mhm.
But you know, this is a question I have for you actually, because maybe it can shift the direction of this thing. I don't know if we want to go here, but I do. Like, does it matter? Like, if we knew this year was going to be so hectic and stuff, like, did you do anything to prepare? How can we prepare the world? Does anybody want to hear some fear monger in a soapbox or whatever? You know, like on one level, I think practically it's like, did you sell your stocks and buy some gold like I told you to, Mom? But on another level, like, let's say we do polish the crystal ball well enough that we can clearly see the visions of the year to come, like more clearly than I can in a chart. You
Mhm.
know, I know you study the sacred science of horary deeply, where you get an answer
Mhm.
and not only a yes or no, but when, where, how, who. You know,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
like, what good is it if we knew and we actually had the ear of, you know, the powers that shouldn't be, or the, I guess if they're listening, the powers that should be, like, how does it matter and how do we apply an astrological awareness on a mundane level to make a difference in this world?
Brad, I think that's a fabulous question. And I think what it boils down to is that as astrologers, we are observers of sacred time. And we allow ourselves moments to observe particular crystallizations of sacred time, quite similar to how you take your camera and you go out and you take a photo of the infinitude, I'm not sure if that's a word, but of the infinitude of the night sky, and you realize that that is a moment that you've crystallized with that photo. And we do that all the time in astrology. We do that in terms of the individual birth chart, insofar as we believe that the birth chart is a crystallization of sacred time. We do the same thing in terms of a horary chart, insofar as we believe that the horary chart is the crystallization of the potencies of your deep desire for an answer and the universe's deep willingness to provide one. And on a mundane level, we do that with the various mundane charts, the Jupiter Saturn chart, the Aries Ingress chart, the eclipse charts. And at the end of the day, we mustn't forget that while we are active interpreters of what these things mean, we are first and foremost observers of time. So it brings up another philosophical point. Would it have been possible for us to do something to avert the tides of change that we find ourselves going through now? Or were we, in a sense, destined to experience these tides of change because of the relationship that we have with the wider cosmos around us? which goes to an even deeper point of this concept of causality within astrology. Is it that something out there is causing something to happen down here, or, which is more my perspective, is it that the thing that's happening out there and the thing that's happening down here are both reflections of a greater tide of change that's happening even further than our ability to perceive it? And that greater change is what we measure by virtue of the planets, but the planets are responding to that greater change just as much as we are. So it isn't that planets cause things to happen on Earth or Earth things happen because of planets, but it's that we're both planetary life, outer super celestial planetary life, and geological Earth life are both reflections of a greater supernal force of change, and the ancients called it the prima mobile, the prime mover, that which moves, that which is moved. And we are moved, but the planets are also moved. So I don't think that, I feel like I'm going around in circles, but I think the main point that I'm getting at is the fact that we are observers of tides of change as astrologers. And if the tides of change were averted to manifest in some other way, they would have manifested all the same, because we can't stop the change that must occur by virtue of our citizenship within a wider cosmic life.
So to honor this, you know, astronomical for astrologer side, you're not circling around it, you're ellipsing around it. Um, but you know, one thing I thought as you were flowing there is, well, I'm really excited to watch this podcast you recorded with Gary Caton,
Yeah,
because your ability to speak in the alchemical language, which you know is similar to his own. I'm really excited to hear where you guys went together in that conversation. So I will be tuning in, and anybody listening here should do the same.
yeah,
There's many things. I mean, there's one option that you didn't involve. Like I'm with you,
yeah.
but the other one is that we're invoking this thing by bringing so much attention to it, right?
Mm,
So, but I think very importantly, like the way that you describe this, we are observers of sacred time. And I had this experience as you said that it was really cool, which is being a musician on the stage. And as I was describing earlier, like I got to a place where when I started this band, I thought I was a really happening saxophone player, and by the end, I like thought I couldn't play a note. It was this really interesting Benjamin Button confidence growth
yeah,
happening. And anyway, but there were times where it didn't matter, like getting out of my own like head and judgments and limitations and criticisms of self, you know, like the easiest breakthrough that was just making eye contact with somebody in the crowd that was really digging it. Right. So somebody that was observing that sacred act of like music, and this band was really about channeling the music of the moment. Like we would have compositions as vehicles that would just open opportunities for us to go and play and explore. And that's happening most, like the language that musicians share, this wordless language, you know, there's something about this happens in astrology too, when we can just look at a chart side by side and we just know. And there's things like we could speak about it and it's great, but there's things that you get to, like it's better not to say about it, and you're there together, you know what I mean? And so musically, that's just such a gift. Actually, my heart's really been going out to fellow musicians who are starved from that opportunity to like speak this wordless language with one another as we get together and play music together. And that also as a metaphor of how starved we all are now, separated into these little internet nodes instead of connecting and as humans should be. Yeah. So, and we'll see that shattered really soon. It's happening now.
yeah.
Anyway, so that idea of sacred observers of time, like I go to that experience of, wow, like sometimes it's not me playing the saxophone. In fact, it wouldn't even get played if I was just in my own head trip about, can I do this or I can't do this. Sometimes it's that person I made eye contact with, and that dude in the crowd is just getting down and he digs it so much. It just completely fueled this thing. And that energy played this, right? And I think you know why I'm saying that. Like there's this great question of like, when we ceremoniously and reverently engage with the heavenly happenings, like, you know, how much are we being heard as we listen? And there's a thing I want to kind of like offer this. monkey wrench of beauty to our flow here.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess the title, which I think you can also see, gives it away.
Mm-hmm.
It's date, so we could cast a chart.
Yeah.
But so, let me just say a few things about this, okay? It was a Moon, Mercury, Venus conjunction in the sign of Gemini, like a tropical sign of Gemini. How amazing. This is obviously a very young moon because this was shot from the northern hemisphere.
Yeah.
And this actually is a Moon-Venus conjunction, like partile within the degree. And so this is a really fun thing about when you go out to the sky. It's like, wait, that's the conjunction I paid for? Like when you talk about like, those things are so far apart. And we learn that planets have latitude,
Yes.
their distance from the ecliptic plane, not only longitude, which is where they are along the ecliptic plane. A beautiful thing about this too is that while Moon and Venus were conjoined by zodiacal degree, by celestial longitude, Mercury and Venus were in the same declination. Mm-hmm. One of the things that means is that like Mercury in this case is following Venus through the sky. So Venus would set right into this tree, and then Mercury later followed Venus right there. So parallels is conjunction by declination. It will always set up this experience for a planet to travel in the wake of the planet that rose before it, according to the primary motion, which traditional astrology, fortunately, is bringing back to the experience and the witness and the delineation set of many modern astrologers in our time. So another thing about Mercury and Venus here is they set out of bounds. So this is very far north of like the due west direction is way off the frame to the left because Gemini is a northern sign, and they were extremely Gemini and also out of bounds. So I haven't been at this house where I took this picture from long enough to know, but my assumption is that the June solstice sun in a couple of weeks is going to set right here and can never, I know for sure, it can never get as far north of where Mercury and Venus set. Okay. So now, when I do that and I go outside and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm watching a parallel and you guys are in Gemini and look at the sky chakras and oh wow, Mercury's in the blue throat chakra and Venus is in the green heart chakra and the moon's in the orange sacral chakra. Like how perfect. And you guys are Gemini and you're about to station retrograde and you're out of bounds, right? It is so hard. Like the more we learn, it is so difficult as astrologers to go to the sky with open ears, right? Because when we have so much to say, and it is so rare for me to go to the sky without wishing to tell these planets who they are and what they're doing, right? And when I go that way, why go at all?
Yeah.
So, I'm going to receive much more by listening than I am through telling.
Mm-hmm.
Why should I even attempt, based on what I've seen through a couple of podcast episodes and Facebook posts and limited exchange that you and I have had, to have any idea of who you are or what you're about? I would so much rather ask you, or experiencing that with open ears. And why, like, how as an astrologer could I learn to do this with the moon? And so there's a really important thing I will say, like I experience many astrologers in this shame and even guilt of not knowing the sky, right? So I'll lead retreats or, teach certification and people come out and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so ashamed. And on some levels, like I hear you, like one of my great things that I'll do is, hey, everybody point to the third house right now. And you'll see a group of astrologers looking around like this. And it's like, you're like, if I showed you a chart and I could tell you what's the thing about that horizontal line. It's like, oh, that's the ground. So what's the difference between the first through the sixth versus the seventh through the 12th house? The first through the sixth houses are below ground. And then we go outside and it's like, where's the third house? Right? So this disconnection between like the intellectual model of the sky and the actual sky is really interesting, right? Yeah. But I don't want to like feed that, because like the guilt shame piece, which is so like strongly programmed into us from our like quackademic,
Mm-hmm.
approach these days. It's like certainly don't want to fortify that. I do want to give some examples of how even in the Hellenistic era we were already so removed from a living experience of the sky, and folks were talking about it then. Like most of the transmissions we have about what Anticia is, like, are off
Mm-hmm.
astronomically, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's weird. But anyway, so people come out and say, I don't know this, I should know this, I don't know any of these constellations. And it's like, yo, you just completely slam the door of the temple.
Yeah.
The password to the temple of the living sky, or anything of the night, anything of the mystery, is wonder, is
Yeah.
awe. And so when we find ourselves like kind of, you know, maniacally giggling at the infinitude, that's your word, right? Wonder, awe, endlessness of it all, and
Yeah.
release ourselves into the field and the truth that, wow, I could never know all of that. And
Mm-hmm.
give ourselves permission, like, not to know.
Mm-hmm.
That's when we start hearing, right?
Yeah.
So, like, a great example of sky stuff I think people have. Last night I had this experience with an owl. It was a cool night. I went out in the yard to give some water back to the earth, and there was this deer right in the yard. And so that was cool. Like, I love deer. That's my Maya day sign in the
Mm-hmm.
Zolkin calendar. And the moon was just amazing. And the Scorpio moon, because I live in the Sagittarius moon, where now she is, like, because I live in the northern hemisphere, is super low. Right. So the moon is illuminating our windows like it hasn't since we moved into this house in January, when the full moon's in January, because the January sun is in Capricorn, the full moon's in Cancer, and Cancer in the northern hemisphere is way up there. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So every month the full moon has been dropping down in the sky, and now it's in this point where you can't sleep at night because it is just blowing up the windows. Right. So I have this
Yeah.
thing with the deer. Then I come up here, and as I said earlier, like, I'm looking out there, and literally an owl, like a huge owl, flew right through the light of the moon.
Wow.
And it used to be that I would say, and I mean, there's $5 over here, what is owl medicine? What was that symbol? What was I gifted? Like, what did this person say? What is the official doctrine of what owl medicine means? Like, and that's cool, but first, why run away from that experience?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if I'm going to ask anyone, why not ask that owl, or the owl? Or why don't I tune into what owl feels like for me, or means? Maybe there was something I was thinking in that moment, I'm conscious of it, that the owl came to punctuate, right? An accent, and say, this matters. And have you thought of it this way, owl in the moon way, right? So how could we as astrologers, who have such a developed vernacular, grammar, syntax, set of rules, equations, physics, how can we do that also, along with tuning into this kind of more natural experience of the thing? So that I can go and I can see Moon, Mercury, and Venus, and not get down on, well, it actually looks like Moon, Venus, and Mercury, but I'd rather say the name grammatically correct of which planet moves faster, so I can see
Right.
who's applying to who. Why, all that stuff. Like, how can I possibly get myself into the place where I can go have an experience of the sky, and allow for the sky then, allow it to speak through me, so that I can be a true terrestrial translator of the celestial conversation.
Mm.
So that's the game. I don't know that I'll ever touch that in my lifetime, but I will say that, like Gary Kane, like Daniel Jamara, like Alan Gainsbourg, like Julian Packard Lewis, like, a lot of folks who have this like sky passion like I do, and there's more and more of us. And for many of us, we actually came to astrology because at some point, a little kid, we saw the Milky Way and it changed everything. How and what will it look like when we start receiving these things? Because sometimes, I'll tell you frankly, like, I have found in my astronomical pursuits, and also in the sets of data that are offered by those telescope carrying NASA cats and whatnot, that so much of our astrological toolbox and delineations of the correspondences have been confirmed when we send probes to far and beyond, you know? And new windows open about, hey, look at that. What might that mean, etc. Right?
Right.
But also, am I willing when I see the sky cast doubt on, you know, something I learned as some truth? When the sky tells me that's not how it works, am I willing to release and eclipse that teaching so that new light of that gem, which will never die, can show itself? So that's the game.
Wow. Oh, well, Brett, several things in that that I think are beautiful as well as potentially terrifying for people who have really gotten locked into an ivory tower relationship to their astrology. I think it's really necessary, the work that you're doing in terms of allowing people to see the sky, because in the same way as you pointed out the fact that the moon and Venus are actually in a conjunction with each other in terms of zodiacal longitude, but they're not if we look at them from the perspective of declination and latitude. I think it's really important because it allows people to have a relationship with the sky as it is. And especially this concept of declination, it's something that's so poo-pooed upon within the 21st century, and there aren't that many people who are either teaching declination. Even though I do know a lot of practitioners use it, there aren't enough people who are transmitting this information about declination and measurement in zodiacal latitude. And I think it's a really important piece, because if you have those parallels or contra-parallels within your chart, they do affect you in ways that you probably wouldn't be able to identify in a more standard ivory tower approach. So, I mean, that's the first thing that I think is really important about what you just said to us. But the other piece, and to really bring it home, the other piece that I think is of utmost importance about what you said to us is that if we don't have this relationship to the living sky, then we've essentially exiled ourselves from the temple. And this takes me back to a Kabbalistic point, and I think I may have mentioned it to Gary as well. But there's a Kabbalistic aphorism that says that forgetfulness is exile. And when we forget the larger backdrop upon which our astrology is built, when we forget that larger cosmic scaffolding upon which the temple of our astrological wisdom is built, then we've essentially exiled ourselves from the heart, the living, tangible heart of astrology. And the image that comes to mind as I think about this is the Hierophant in the tarot, whereas the Hierophant is a symbol of the mystery tradition. However, if you get caught up on the outer facade of the Hierophant, then you miss the deeper inner teachings that the Hierophant is capable of giving you. And it's not that the Hierophant is trying to hide information from you intentionally, but if you, as a practitioner, only get stuck in their outer courtyard of the temple, then that's completely on you. And I think that we, as astrologers, need to realize that there is an inner temple. There is a holiest of holies that we're meant to move towards, but it has to come back to us having a relationship with the natural, magical, awe-inspiring sky that is around us.
Right when you said Hierophant, I heard first heron. So there's been a great blue heron around recently. And here, that's kind of the closest we get to the ibis bird, which was representative of Jehuti, right? Who many of us know as Thoth or Thoth. So there's this story that when humankind was falling from grace, from falling from the golden age, and we were beginning to forget that this is when Jehuti created language to preserve human wisdom. and that he went to brag to those greater than he and said, look what I have done. I have preserved like human wisdom. I have created, you know, this opportunity for the library of all knowing. And they said, you fool, in the glory of your creation, you do not see its darkness. You have just destroyed human memory, right? And so the truth is, like, these days, how often am I going to ask, like, the sky to show me when I saw a moon in Antares last night that means, you know, moon was at like 10 Sag. Like, it's so much easier for me to just push a button and cast a chart on the phone, right? Or many of these examples, yeah? So there's something in that learning. And as this gets so distant, like, why should declination matter if it's just a list of numbers? On one level, you see that it works, right? So that's a really important thing about like what we call astrology that does not necessitate what I'm saying, like have the sky experience. Like, I'm passionate about it, as you can see, and I appreciate you receiving and reflecting it. But at the same time, like, what if I told you that declination means how high a planet is in the Earth sky, or how low it is to the ground, and that that's different in Richmond, California, where I sit, than it is in the Bahamas, and that it's cool to tune into that. And actually, where you are, you can have declinations where a planet's directly above your head, and doesn't that matter? How is that planet experienced in the Bahamas when the Bahamas are where that planet is directly staring at that moment? That seems important to me, you know? But to speak also to this disconnect between the living sky, right, and like what declination is more than just a number, it's really interesting. Like you mentioned celestial latitude, as I did earlier too. I don't see people working with it much. So it's really interesting that in these two coordinate systems, one measured from the ecliptic, which is the plane of the year, the Earth-Sun relationship, right? The zodiac, like that's longitude and latitude. And then declination belongs to a measurement from Earth's celestial equator, the plane of our rotation, the primary motion. And that's right ascension and declination. And somehow astrologers who are hip to declination, which is great, they're like, longitude and declination. So they're taking like the X from one coordinate system and the Y from another coordinate system to the point where it's really mixed up. It's one of the greatest confusions I see often, like embodied by astrologers in our day and age. And like I'm a beta tester for one of the great softwares today. And I mean, gosh, credit to these people who do this amazing thing to create the softwares we use. But they had in the software for a short time, because it's changed now, but a list of the ecliptic stars, which is a great thing to have. And they were saying, you know, within 10 degrees declination. And so they weren't printing out the ecliptic stars at all. They were printing out celestial equator stars, which I'm fascinated with anyway. Like, that changes with precession. It's cool. I'm getting super nerdy here, and I shouldn't. But importantly, like, the reason why that thing's disconnected is because we are getting super nerdy in the expression that means like living only in the intellectual space. And if we don't have, I feel, that embodied experience of it, how can we possibly meet the mind and the body mind in that middle place, which is the heart, which is the true gateway of the mystery? So it's hard, Mychal, it's hard for me to understand where I live in the, you know, quenched sky of your drowned sky in the urban lights, like that a full moon, like how much it matters. When I'm in like Sedona and I'm out hiking by full moon, and it's in a sense for a guy like me a bit of a drag because you can't see the Milky Way and all the other stuff that like Arizona shows, but I can walk out around in the midst of cacti and the fear of rattlesnakes or whatever it may be with no worries, because you're fully illuminated by that silver glow. Whereas on a new moon night, and I love doing that, like it's somewhat terrifying, right? Because you can't see anything. And to tap in just to that experience, which hopefully everybody's gotten far enough from the urban, you know, realms to experience like the phases of the moon, not just intellectually and not just through the visionary experience, which matters so much. Seeing a full moon is a thing, you know, but to experience that truth that, wow, what about those days before lights? Like, I would not have been leaving home at new moon time because it's somewhat terrifying. And when we tune into that, now we open this whole gateway of delineations about lunations that like it's right there. It's less and less available to our experience because of our urban lifestyle, but it is still there if we choose to become human again in that sense of, you know, becoming one with nature. And I think this is that time. You know, Terence McKenna spoke about the necessity for an archaic revival. I appreciate this Capricorn Council, as I've been calling this gathering of Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto in that tropical sign, with Uranus in the sign of Taurus. You know, it really feels to me like that. It's time for us to take back that like earth wisdom of the body mind, that kind of root stuff, and then like marry that to this dome of the heavens intellectual stuff,
Yeah.
so that we can be in the place of the heart. And my heart like shines and smiles upon this opportunity to speak about these things with you, Mychal, and to hear about these things from you, Mychal. And I'm really excited for the first time that you and I get to be out under the stars and speaking with one another and illuminating one another. Like I've certainly been illuminated from this time together with you today. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you very, very much, Brett. It means so much for me to have you here and to be in a space of utter reflection with you where we feel so similarly about the same things and where we've dedicated so much of our lives to making these things take root within our hearts so that it could inform the greater experience of our relationship to not just astrology as a standalone practice, but our relationship to this greater cosmic life that we live in. I'm so thrilled to be a part of this cosmic life with you, and I'm so happy to have you on this path with me.
Right on. Yeah, let's do this again, because I thought where we might go today is into some of my own personal discomforts and towards and resistances towards some of your theories, which I think really matter and are right on. And I'm afraid to admit that. And I'm really excited to go like draw in that sandbox with you sometime. So let's do this again, please.
Let us most definitely go there. And Gemini Brett, I'm so grateful for you being here today. You have brought so much erudition and so much depth of wisdom to not just this conversation, but also to those of us who are your friends on Facebook who just can't wait for you to post another photo or make another video and allow us to steep in this world of the living sky with you. So thank you so much for doing that work within the world. We celebrate your work, we love your work, and it means the world to us. So thank you so very much.
Thank you, Mychal. Yeah, man, you brought tears to the eyes like 3 times today. That's job well done. All right, brother. I will see you in space. Thanks again.
Most definitely. And for our listeners out there, thank you so much for joining us once again on the Oraculos True Divination podcast. It means the world to me that you've been here from the inception and that you've sent your comments and your feedback and your likes. And as always, please share this content with your astrologically minded friends and possibly even your friends who aren't that into astrology so that people can know that these wonderful conversations about this major part of our collective human experience are being had, or rather is being had, here on the True Divination podcast. Thank you guys so much. You mean the world to me. I love you. Be well. And until next time, bye-bye. Brett Joseph.
And to you, man, really, really well held. Like my favorite ever. Well, I mean, I feel I share like the same story too many times because I'm meeting new people and that's kind of the things, you know. But it was my favorite container to explore some of these, like some of my greatest hits. So thanks, man.
Thank you.